Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Tom Nixon, and I'm the head of the MA program in History of Art at the Courtauld. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual open day. I'm joined today by Alex Hawkins, who is our admissions officer, and I'm going to speak for the next kind of 20-30 minutes about the MA program, and then Alex will give you some details about the application process, and there'll be some time for questions as well. I hope you've also had a chance to see Caroline Levitt's introduction to the Courtauld and to studying art history here more broadly. So just tell you a little bit about myself. I work on medieval art and architecture, broadly speaking, across Europe and the Mediterranean. I teach one of the MA courses. Next year, I'll be teaching a course about medieval Iberia. But I'm here really today with my head of MA hat on, as it were. I should say also that I did the MA myself a few years ago, so I have a sense of the program as a student as well. And what I want to do is just to explain a little bit about the structure of the program and how it's conceived. So as you will, I'm sure, know, it's a 9-month program that operates over 2 semesters in the autumn and the spring, and then concludes in the summer when you submit your dissertations. And in broad terms, I think you can think of the MA as made up of 2 kind of central strands which intersect at various moments. One is the talk component, which consists of the methodologies in conversation strand, which I'll talk about, and also your special options, which I'll also explain in a moment. And kind of complementing that is the research strand. Research is something that you'll be doing all the way through the MA, researching in preparation for seminars and lectures and trips, researching for your different assessments. And the culmination of that really is the 10,000 word dissertation that you submit in the summer, which is an independent project that you use your special option class as a kind of a springboard, if you like, for that independent piece of research under the guidance of your special options tutor. So teaching at the Courtauld, I mean, I think one of the really wonderful things about being an MA student at the Courtauld is that experience of being surrounded by so many other students who are not there because they've been obliged to go there, or because their kind of parents have pushed them into a particular degree or whatever. They're there because they love art history, and there is nowhere else in the country, indeed nowhere else in the world, where you can belong to such a large community of art historians. And that community consists of your MA special options group, typically somewhere between 6 and 10 students, but also the wider Courtauld community, including other students and researchers, and indeed the whole kind of research community, including visiting scholars and lectures, conferences and seminars that take place here. So it's an opportunity to belong to a very dynamic but also kind of focused community. The range of materials taught at the Courtauld is very wide, but all of us consider ourselves to be art historians and are interested in visual and material cultures, and that I think can be very stimulating, particularly for anyone who's come from kind of other small departments where you might feel like kind of outnumbered by historians or people in other humanities subjects. The other distinct thing about the Courtauld is its location in London. That means that our students have a very strong relationship with other events taking place in London, with other students, with other research events and seminars, and there's lots and lots of things going on that you can take part in as a London student, but also with galleries and sites and museums in London and beyond. And there is, depending a little bit on the course and what's available and how well suited it is to the particular special option that you're doing, a wide range of places and objects that you have an opportunity to engage with closely. And here I'm just showing you a few photos of recent trips that we've done with students. Those are my students actually in the bottom left in the Great Mosque of Cordoba before they were told off by the security guards. But as well as museums and sites in London and beyond, of course, we also have the Courtauld Gallery. When Caroline recorded her video, it was just before the gallery had officially opened, but that opened last Friday, to widespread acclaim in the popular press and elsewhere. And that represents, I think, a really wonderful opportunity for you to go and see this collection newly hung. It looks, I have to say, completely spectacular, and is a kind of an excuse for you really to think about your MA studies, not just as a kind of process of class discussion or reading in the library or at home, but also as an opportunity and excuse to get out to the Courtauld Gallery and other sites in London and beyond. So I want to turn now to look at the special options which form the core really of the MA in the history of art. And they take the form of 30 classes that are spread out across 2 semesters in the spring and the autumn terms. And they are complemented by 9 tutorials where your special options tutor will give you guidance on your assessments. I should say that 30 classes to some might seem like not very much, like that you won't be busy, but what I can guarantee you and what any of our current MA students will tell you is that the MA at the Courtauld is extremely intensive. That between preparation for seminars, doing the kind of appropriate level of reading, preparing potentially presentations, writing essays and essay drafts, attending other lectures and research events, you're kept extremely busy on the MA. It's a very intense program, but I think that kind of generates a very special kind of momentum that culminates in the submission of the dissertation in the summer. In addition to your classes, you also work on 4 what we call formative assessments. That's to say pieces of work which they might vary. They might be essays, they might be blog entries, they might be kind of longer presentations, but they are assessments which don't contribute to your final grade, but give you an opportunity to try out ideas, to get feedback from your special option tutor, and to really kind of refine your writing and research. So that when you come to your 4 summative assessments, those are assessments that contribute to your final degree classification, you are working to the very best of your abilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about those summative assessments a bit later. But as I've hinted at already, I should say that the MA Special Options classes form only one part of the kind of broader experience of studying at the Courtauld. You have in addition the methodologies and conversation sessions in the autumn term, which I will talk about, but also a very wide range of other activities. Caroline in her video has already mentioned the research forum, which has an extraordinarily lively program of research seminars and lectures and conferences that take place almost every night of the week throughout the year. And those events are almost invariably free to students and offer you an opportunity to hear about new work by new scholars, by established scholars, some from the Courtauld, some from beyond, but to get a sense of a kind of a broader research community. And then our MA students are also invited to attend in person or virtually, depending on circumstances, a number of other lectures that we offer to other students at the Courtauld. Those include our foundations lectures, which provide a kind of broad-ranging survey, effectively, of art and architecture from antiquity to the present. Our constellations lectures, which are directed primarily at our undergraduate and graduate diploma students, but also provide a very broad and helpful foundation. They're based around a kind of series of thematically organized issues, and our lessons in critical interpretation lectures, which offer insights into key methodological approaches to art history. So there's an opportunity to take advantage of other teaching at the Courtauld in order to kind of supplement the core special option teaching. And those special options next year take a very wide variety of forms, really ranging geographically from late antiquity to the present, and here on the website you will find them organized alphabetically. Here I just show you kind of broadly in chronological terms, because in some cases these special options join together to do teaching together. So here are the 4 medieval options, 2 of which engage with questions of Islamic, Christian, and to some extent Jewish interactions in the medieval Mediterranean. 2 others which range across, broadly speaking, Northern and Western Europe. And some of those classes we hold jointly as well, so that you have opportunities not only to meet people in your special options classes, but also other students who are working on broadly similar issues to you, but bring to those issues a kind of different range of perspectives. Then we have the Renaissance MA options, which under the umbrella of one course, Continuity and Innovation, Reframing Italian Renaissance Art from Masaccio to Michelangelo, offer a number of kind of separate strands, which enable you to explore different aspects of Italian Renaissance art. And then we have a large number of options that engage with 19th, 20th, and 21st century art and architecture. And you can see a range of those on the screen here. And they too have a number of shared interest classes, where those, particularly in the autumn term, in the autumn semester, where those students on those courses come together for a series of lectures and discussions, which we call snapshots, where students on those options have a chance to hear different members of faculty talking about their own research, and to discuss those again with students who have broadly similar interests, but may be coming at different problems from different perspectives. So the idea is that you have this kind of core of your special option classes, but also opportunities to engage with broader issues and to meet other students. And that idea is also lies behind, to some extent, the methodologies and conversation strand that runs in addition to the special options classes in the autumn term. And methodology and conversation is a strand of, as it suggests, effectively kind of conversations. And here I'm showing you, for some reason the top of my screen is cut off, but I think you can see it all. Here I'm showing you this week's, this semester's program. What these represent are a series of short lectures by members of faculty on current issues of concern in art history, and they are paired up in order to kind of produce a dialogue between people working potentially on quite different materials, but sharing the same kinds of problems and approaches. And in addition to those lectures, there's a kind of strong discussion element, which brings together everyone on the MA program. We have one of the largest, if not, well, it is the largest postgraduate program in art history. We have somewhere typically between about 180 and 200 students in the MA in the history of art. And this is an opportunity for people to come together, whether they're working on medieval or modern or Italian or Chinese materials, and to address common concerns and bring those different perspectives to the course. It changes each year, and the idea is that it sort of complements other courses that some of you may have done if you did an undergraduate degree in art history with a kind of methodologies or kind of theoretical framework. But the idea is that this is in some way kind of more agile, responds to current concerns of faculty and of art historians, and offers insight into different ways of approaching those problems. So the structure of the MA, broadly speaking, is that it runs, as I say, from October to June, with a range of different assessments. So the first summative assessment, that is to say, the first assessment that contributes to your final degree classification, is your first assessed essay. That's a 4,000 word piece of writing that's submitted in November, and represents 15% of your final classification. In February, in the spring semester, you submit another essay of 4,000 words. That's weighted slightly more heavily in recognition of the fact that there's a kind of trajectory through the MA as you become more familiar with the essay writing process. That's worth 20%. And then in March, you submit a virtual exhibition exercise, which I'll talk about in a moment, which complements the kind of traditional essay writing format of the other assessments, but invites you to think slightly differently about the material you studied. And then the MA culminates in the dissertation, which, as you can see, is worth a full 50% of your overall MA grade and is submitted in June. So the essays, I think, are relatively straightforward. For each of those essays, you have tutorials where your special options teacher will give you guidance, and for your first essay, will also read a draft and kind of really help you to articulate your ideas. The virtual exhibition project that's submitted in March is a slightly different kind of exercise, and I'm showing you just a couple of examples, images from one of my previous students who's worked on this. This is an exercise that invites you to, as it were, curate a virtual exhibition, to bring together up to 30 objects, and to use that opportunity to think about how you can create an argument by bringing together those objects or images around a particular theme in a particular space. You don't have to think about kind of real world problems of insurance and whether museums will give you loans or whatever, but it is an opportunity to think about a number of practical considerations. How do you want to lead your visitors through your exhibition, and what kind of argument you want to make with that exhibition? What does it mean to put different images together or objects together, and how does that help to create an argument? And for that exhibition exercise, you will write, for example, a sample wall text, the kind of text that you might find in an exhibition describing the particular theme of a subsection of the exhibition, a sample wall label, restricted to just 100 words. That's a useful exercise. How do you compress all that you know about a particular object into just 100 words? And also a catalogue entry, a kind of a more scholarly study of one of your objects. So it's an opportunity to think very creatively, and often the virtual exhibition exercises are some of my favorite things to mark. It brings out the kind of creative streak in a lot of students. It tests different skills from the essays. For instance, your labels and your wall panels are not going to be kind of heavily footnoted in the way that you would expect an essay to be, but they require you to write in a kind of accessible but still kind of meaningful way. It's an exercise I think that a lot of our students find very rewarding. And then the final component of the MA, as I've said, is the dissertation. This is a 10,000 word piece of work. It's closely supervised by your MA special options tutor, so who will give you 4 tutorials to help you to shape and refine your thinking. And often I have to say it's one of the most rewarding parts of the MA for students interrogate materials and to research them in depth. You've got a bit more time than you have on some of your other assessments, and so an opportunity to really dig in deep into materials. And often our MA dissertations uncover new materials. Many of them end up being of publishable quality. They go into our library as a kind of permanent record of that achievement, and represent in many ways the sum of what you've achieved in the MA. So that MA, we hope, will lead you into different directions. In some cases, as you can see from these alumni, they've led students into later careers in galleries or other arts organizations. But the MA also, I should say, prepares you with a range of skills and a rigorous approach to materials that can be useful for any kind of career. And many of our students indeed go on to jobs in media and finance, marketing and so on. These are these offer you a kind of wide range of transferable skills, but one that's rooted in the close analysis of visual evidence, and that is something I think that many employers really appreciate. So I will end now just by saying a few words about the application process before passing over to Alex, our admissions officer. Part of the application process, you give your preferences of your special options, ranked 1 to 3. Obviously, we try to give people their first choice, but there's a kind of competitive process for those. Our spaces are limited. You'll also invited to give a personal statement, 2 references, a writing sample. Would say is a very important part of the application process. As someone who reads these, think carefully about how you can submit a writing sample that really demonstrates your ability to write and articulate your thoughts and your academic transcripts. And you can see there that there's an expectation that generally that UK students will have achieved a good 2-1 in their BA degree. That doesn't necessarily have to be in art history, but might be in a kind of complementary subject, or a kind of overseas equivalent. But I'm going to pass over to Alex now, who will give you some more details on that. And please do put any questions you might have into the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to answer those. Over to you, Alex.
Great, thank you, Tom. So I'm just going to add a little bit of detail to some of the information that's on the apply slide here. And give some idea of the application deadline and some of the dates after that. And then I'm going to try and preempt some of the questions that we sometimes get, and when I speak to students at campus tours, we sometimes get as well. So the thing that most importantly kind of on the horizon is the application deadline for the MA History of Art program itself. The initial deadline is the 17th of January 2022. We will hold applications open beyond that, often into the summer, but that's the date to get your application in, to get the kind of guarantee of being looked at by your first choice options. Subsequently, after that, and once applications start to be reviewed, options will start to make offers to students, and some of the options will fill up. So the best way of guaranteeing that you get seen and the best chance of getting onto the options that really interest you is to get your application in for the 17th of January deadline. Following that deadline, we review and release applications to our academic colleagues. Through February into very early March, they review their options kind of in the order of the rounds of preference. And then from March onwards, anyone who's not been kind of assigned to an option yet, and if there are options that are still open, we have our own MA clearing process where we try to match students up with options that are still open that might be relevant, and then through into the 1st of April, which is the decision deadline for you if you're made an offer. And so that's kind of the outline of the time frame to expect if you get your application in on the 17th of January. In addition to that, and importantly for many of you, will be the scholarships deadline, our own internal Courtauld scholarship deadline. That hasn't been fully set yet. We'll have information on the time frame for the Courtauld scholarship process for this year in the new year. It will normally open in February, and then kind of we typically aim to get decisions out for scholarships about a week before the decision deadline. So about a week before that 1st of April deadline. And that's kind of a quick overview of the timeframes. There'll be more information on much of that on the how to apply page of the website, alongside application guidance for the actual the substance of the application itself. To add a little bit more detail to some of the things that Tom mentioned earlier, and kind of, as I say, preempting some questions, the personal statement, you supply one for each of your preferences, 600 words. And typically we often get asked, can I repeat content within that, or what? It's not a particularly large personal statement, but what's good to kind of capture in that, and Tom can add to this once I finish if there's anything that I'm missing. But you can repeat a significant portion of that. There's information that will be relevant about yourself, about your interests in the subject generally, about any work experience that might feed into it, that you think is important to repeat across them. But then you should tailor each of your personal statements for the options, and kind of pick out why the option appeals to you, what you might want to do with it going forward, and things like that. So that's one thing that we often get asked. You absolutely do repeat some of that, and kind of think about how you can individualize each of the personal statements. Another thing quickly on references, a question we get quite often is supplying 2 academic references, or if it's been a little while since you studied, maybe 1 academic reference, and if it's been a certain period of time, or if you've got a professional reference which you think is really relevant, maybe directly feeds into the area of research and the area of study of the MA option you're about to embark on, or wish to embark on, you can consider that. But typically, if possible, 2 academic references are preferred. And the last thing I would say is, and this is getting beyond kind of, or sort of supplementing the application process itself, we've got some Q&A sessions coming up, and there'll be more information sent to you by the mailing list or on the website for questions for me and my colleagues in the admissions team. But there's also a chance to come and see where we're studying in Vernon Square too. We have our campus tours. We're holding 2 weekly tours during term time up until the Christmas break, and they'll be led by a current student. You get a kind of chance to ask a student about their experience so far, and then at the end of that, myself or my colleague in the admissions team will be around to take questions in person too, on site. So there's a couple of different ways you can contact us and get in touch with us. If you have any other questions, particularly looking at the kind of application process, and before you're getting your applications in, about overseas qualifications, about UK qualifications that aren't kind of quite aligned to this, or any language requirements, do get in touch with us at the pgadmissions@courtauld.ac.uk address, which my colleagues just put in the chat. Incredibly well timed. And that's really my section, and kind of my main bit of information over. So we're getting lots of questions in the chat, so I think without further ado, Tom and I can start picking them.
Alex, yeah, I would say just to the question of the kind of applications, I mean, what tutors are looking for are academic ability and potential. That's important, but they're also looking for a good fit with the course. You want students who are really committed to the material and who are going to kind of work well together. So I think in your personal statements, I think it's always gratifying to see evidence of kind of real engagement with the content of the course. Not all our students have necessarily kind of studied that exact field before, but in those circumstances, I would say that your personal statement is particularly important as a way of showing that you are kind of deeply engaged with the materials that you're proposing to study. And often, one, you might talk there about if you've been to kind of any exhibitions or collections or sites that relate to the field of study, or indeed anything that you've kind of read that you found particularly insightful. You don't need to kind of wax lyrically about your kind of passion for the subject, and that you kind of breathe it every minute. There's no need for that kind of hyperbole, but actually some things that your special options tutors can really see signs of engagement with the material of the course. So there are a few questions here, which I think I'm going to work my way down. Occasionally I'll pass to you, Alex, if for kind of clarification. So the first question I have is, what about if we have 2 degrees? Is an average of both? I guess that refers to the expectation that you have a good 2-1, usually an average of about 65. If you have 2 degrees already, I would say that normally that your special options tutor would be most interested in the most recent degree. It depends a little bit if they kind of full, if they follow one another immediately or not. But I would say that none of these things are absolute, and it's the same with the kind of average of 65. That that the special options tutors, when they look through those applications, they're looking for a kind of combination of your academic record, but also your personal statement, your references, your writing sample. So it's a kind of much more kind of contextual, comprehensive assessment of that. I have also questions. Do you welcome students with an undergraduate degree in an unrelated discipline such as business management? Do you have any suggestions of how we can showcase our passion and interest for the subject in order to strengthen our application? So what I would say is that we wouldn't automatically discount anyone who has a degree in a completely unrelated field. But I would say that there are some fields that are going to be kind of more, that will equip you more obviously with the kinds of skills that you need for the MA in History of Art. So, other humanities disciplines which have a strong element of writing, but also research. So kind of cognate disciplines like history or English. I think if you wanted to apply coming from quite a different background, I would say then it's particularly important that in your personal statement you make clear, how you can kind of compensate for that, as it were, and also in your writing sample that you really show that you can engage with art historical questions, both with images and with the kind of extant scholarship. But I would say as well that we do have a graduate diploma program, which is designed for students with a previous degree in an unrelated area, which works as a kind of accelerated degree that prepares people for the MA program. So if you are unsure, do have a look at the graduate diploma program as well. Separate texts can be submitted as written samples, and I would say the answer is yes. that's fine. As long as they don't, please could you clarify if choose to go over, the word count or significantly over word count, it's fine to submit 2 different written samples. But what I would say is it's really helpful when reading your written samples to understand the context of them. So if you're submitting some writing that's a section of a dissertation that you submitted as part of your undergraduate degree, it's very useful if you could just preface it with a few lines explaining that. Or on the contrary, if it's something, it's an essay that you had a week to write, that's helpful to know. Or indeed, if it's something that maybe you haven't come from a degree that's kind of related, and you've entirely studied and written something yourself, then it's useful to have that kind of context as well. So I would say whatever you do is fine. Make sure that we can see any images that you're talking about, so that those images are included along with your writing sample. But also, if you can just briefly preface it with a few lines explaining the context, that's really helpful. Another question I see here is, how many options can you choose, or is it only one? And is it possible to apply if your BA thesis hasn't been graded yet? So you have the opportunity to choose up to 3 options, and I'd recommend that you give all 3 in your order of preference. It may be that there's only one that interests you at all, and you just want that and wouldn't even consider any other options. Although, of course, the materials do vary across the MA special options, there is a kind of a common experience of the MA History of Art at the Courtauld, and I would certainly encourage you to be open-minded about those options and about what your second and third choices might be. And you can absolutely apply if your BA thesis hasn't been graded yet. In those circumstances, you may be offered a conditional offer, depending on your final grade, that you meet that kind of requirement for a good 2-1. But that's no problem at all. Plenty of our students apply in those circumstances.
Yeah, and just to add to that, similar case for English language requirements as well. If you're needing to take an English language test to provide evidence of the English language requirements, that can be a condition of offer as well if it's not complete by the time you're made an offer. So that's a similar deal for that.
Thanks, Alex. Then there's a question here: what support is available for those who've been out of formal education for a couple of years or completed an undergrad degree in a different subject to art history? Well, I would say that there's a kind of a range of different forms of support that are available to you there. So built into the special options are what I call those 4 formative assessments. Those are pieces of work that you do that don't count towards your final degree. So they're a chance for you to get feedback on your ideas, try out different ways of writing and so on, in a kind of unpressured way, as it were. You can, there's no consequences. So that's one way, and that's certainly, I think, of my own MA students, typically I would squeeze in 3 of those before their first assessed essay, so they have a real chance to try out writing and presentations, and to get feedback before they submit any summative work. So that's one form. I would say the other way that students can be helped with this is precisely to attend those other lectures that I talked about, the foundations and constellations lectures, which are to some extent geared towards our undergraduate and graduate diploma students, and provide a very kind of broad context for the materials that you might be studying in your special options. And the third kind of support is our writing support. So we have support for students with specific learning difficulties, but we also have 2 Royal Literary Fund fellows who are writers in their own right, and offer support to all our students. And it's actually, the Courtauld's incredibly lucky to have 2 of these fellows. And you can make an appointment with them, give them a piece of your writing, and they can really help. They will, help you to think about how you write and how you articulate your ideas. They're not necessarily trained as art historians, but they know about writing, not just how to write beautifully and fluently, but also how to structure your time and structure an argument and so on. And that opportunity to discover of your writing for an hour is a kind of extraordinary luxury. So I think that's gives a really important opportunity. I have some questions here about particular special options. What I would say is that our special options vary from year to year. In some circumstances, staff are on sabbatical or on something like maternity leave. So in those years, special options are not run. But typically that would just be for 1 year and then they will return the following year. So if you are particularly committed to a particular option or particular teacher or professor, you may wish to wait for a year, or you may, it might be worth looking at some of the other special options to see if there's something kind of similar that interests you. A question: if you applied for the course before and have been unsuccessful, you have to declare this in your application. No, you don't. Each application is taken on its own merits, its own terms. Can the writing sample be taken from undergraduate dissertations or exhibition proposals or essays? Absolutely. Anything. It's really, I think, what I would recommend is that you choose a writing sample that really showcases your writing abilities, your abilities to do research. As long as it, I think, in some cases you might, if you've done a degree, let's say in English or history, it might not be engaging with kind of visual materials, but something that shows that you can, your powers of writing and researching and thinking and arguing is the key thing. But if you can include something that shows your ability to engage with visual evidence, and that's particularly helpful. So there's a question about references, and whether it's fine to give personal email addresses or institutional ones. Yes, I think it would be fine to give a personal email address. That's not uncommon. So more questions about writing samples. So again, what I would say, kind of broadly speaking, is that there are no absolute kind of fixed criteria for the writing samples. What they need to do is demonstrate your ability to write and to articulate an idea. So I can see someone saying, does it have to relate to your special option, or can it be on a different subject? I would say it's fine. It would be unusual in lots of cases that someone would have a writing sample or something very close to special option. So it's fine if it deals with different material. That's not a problem. And someone here saying that their maximum word count is of what they've got. Writing sample is 2,500 words. Does that matter? I would say again, that would be fine. I think if you were getting under, if you had a very short writing sample, then that might be problematic. But if it's kind of pertinent to your application, 2,500 words is probably fine. It's the full context that really matters. There's a question here about personal statements. Do we submit a personal statement for each special option and also a more general personal statement? So the answer is your personal statement is geared towards your special option and your different preferences, but it might be that within that there might be some kind of general stuff that you, as it were, copy and paste, and then some specific information about your the particular special option. Lots of, oh my goodness, 34 new. All right, okay, well, let's see how we get on with these. So there's a question about any advice for mature students return to study after a long break. Well, I would say, is there any advice? I would say it's useful to get a reference from someone, a recent reference, so someone who knows you perhaps in a professional capacity. I would also say that that a writing sample from, let's say, the kind of last 5 years or so is helpful. I wouldn't, if you did your first degree 20 years ago, I would hesitate then about submitting that. And it might be that you write something new, particularly for the application. That could be something like an exhibition review. You go and see a recent exhibition or a new display, and you write about that. But something that shows a kind of relatively recent engagement with the field, broadly concerned, I would say is significant. And again, use your personal statement as a way to kind of explain your trajectory. We have plenty of, many mature students that apply, and that's absolutely not necessarily, is not an issue. But again, the more kind of context you can apply, that you can provide, the better. Decision deadline. Maybe I'll pass to you on this, Alex.
Yeah, so this is a question. The decision deadline for you, if you're made an offer, is the 1st of April 2022. And that, if you're made an offer, this is all kind of built off of the 17th of January 2022 kind of initial application deadline. If there are options that are open through that are later, we might have later deadlines if we made an offer for those options. But generally speaking, kind of the main bulk of offers and reviewing of applications kind of goes from the 17th of January 2022 initial application deadline, reviewing across February and March, and offers kind of through that period as well. And then the decision deadline, if you're made an offer during that period, would be the 1st of April 2022. And the only kind of extension to that is if you're made an offer for an option which is still open, which is close to that, and then you get a kind of extension. But generally speaking, you keep those kind of the main deadlines in mind.
Okay, so some of these questions obviously have come through before I've answered them, so there's some duplication. I'm not going to answer all of them, but I'll kind of pick and choose a bit. So the question here is, a languages BA in Italian and Spanish considered to be a relevant humanity subject? Absolutely. I mean, I teach on Spanish material, for instance, and I and my colleagues are always delighted to have students with languages. So yes, absolutely. And if you didn't have in that circumstance a writing sample that was expressly dealing with art historical concerns, again, it wouldn't necessarily matter. Although if you can show some kind of engagement with visual material, that's always helpful. There's a question about the MA dissertation, its relationship to a PhD. It can have a relationship, or it can be something completely different. It doesn't matter. We will be looking to recruit. So the question, how many students do you plan to recruit for next year? Somewhere, I would say, between about 180 and 200 students. It's always difficult to tell, especially with current circumstances. But the key part of that is that the special options classes are typically somewhere between kind of 6 and 10 students. So we would generally keep to that. Do we have to wait for our references to come through before we apply? Alex, do you want to?
No, so we typically give a 2-week window after the application deadline for the references to come in. If they go beyond that, you'll start to get automatic emails from our system saying we haven't received them yet. And then that's a kind of a prompt for you to start chasing them up. What would sometimes happen is if we don't get the one of those references through, we might send the application to kind of the academic review stage before the second references come through, which pragmatically speaking does weaken your application. So it's good to try to keep on top of the references coming in kind of in that 2-week window. Otherwise, we don't want to hold your application back, because then you start to run the risk of not being seen by the by the your first preference alongside all the other options. So it's quite an important point to kind of keep on top of your references coming in within that 2-week window.
Yeah, and as someone who writes a lot of references for students, I would say, it's good to give, if you want to get a reference from someone, to ask them well in advance and to give them very clear deadlines of what they need to do and where they need to go. And in fact, I certainly always ask people to send me their full details of their application and all the deadlines well in advance, and that I would certainly recommend for you. So I'm going to, again, slightly selectively move through these questions. Should the essay sample piece of writing be marked by institution or an unmarked copy? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't need to be, we don't need to see a marked version. An unmarked version is fine, and indeed it could be something that where you've submitted an essay, you've got some feedback, and you've gone back and you've improved it on the basis of that feedback and then submitted it. We want to see the kind of best example of your work. Do we need to include a proposed dissertation question in our personal statement? No, absolutely not. There'd be no expectation. In fact, I would say that it's good to keep an open mind as you go through the MA classes about your dissertation topic, and that because it may change. There's a question about working as well as studying. I would say a lot of our undergraduates study it. MA. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, frozen for a moment. Or Sadi, can people hear me?
Okay. I think, yeah, I'm not sure if it's me or you.
Okay. Okay, I'm turning off my video in the hope that means my connection is better. I can see some problems there. So there was a question about working while studying. I would say that it's quite hard to do that during the MA, certainly during the talk component of the course, so in the autumn and spring semesters. Some people do a little bit of work alongside it, and sometimes there's a bit of work at the Courtauld, which can be a good way to supplement income without having to kind of travel far. But it is very intensive, the MA. One of the reasons for having it keeping it as a 9-month MA is precisely so that students have that kind of 3-month summer where they can work. So I would say I wouldn't count on being able to work during the MA, maybe a little bit during your dissertation research period, but otherwise you won't have a lot of time. When will special options the academic year 2022? Yes, those are the ones that are now visible up there now. Is there a place in the application portal for us to explain the context of the writing sample, or should we include that in the writing sample? I would say include that in the writing sample if you can. You don't have to apply for all 3 special options. You can apply for only 1 or 2, but obviously that does mean that if you are not accepted onto your first or second choice, then you have less control. There is a kind of pooling system where students who aren't chosen for their first choices go into a kind of a broader pool, but obviously in a way then you've got less control over who might pick you up if they've got spaces on their special options. So I would in general always advise you to give all 3 choices. So there's a question about kind of teaching and overlapping teaching. So it says, you mentioned that tutors and the special options can often teach together. Is it possible to attend lectures of other special options? I.e., if I'm taking the miniature to monumental option, would I be able to occasionally attend Arts of Intimacy seminars with my module overlaps with the supernatural option. So I would say that some MA special options tutors will have joint classes that address issues that are relevant to kind of students in a similar field, but on different special options. But there is also a kind of intimacy and confidence that builds up from those smaller able to attend other seminars in other special options, unless they were geared, set out as kind of shared interest teaching. Sessions might be possible to make one-off exceptions, and that would be something you would need to discuss with those tutors. But in general, I think that we try to preserve that kind of particular atmosphere that you get from a small class discussion, but occasionally also offer opportunities to bring in perspectives from other people. So there's a question about the virtual exhibition. Is it expected to be an animated, navigational, multi-sensory walk-through virtual reality, or is it still a display of 30 objects and their analysis? It's a good question. And I would say it doesn't have, I showed you an example from a student who just happened to have some good IT skills. But you're not tested on your IT skills for virtual exhibition. You are tested on your ability to choose, to select objects and to make an argument through that selection and write about them. So, many people offer it just in a straightforward Word document with some images, and that's all that's required. If you can do that kind of those more fancy graphics, that's a kind of a bonus extra, but is absolutely not a requirement of that exercise. So the question, how much time is spent on campus in classes versus doing personal research work? Additionally, we'll have the option to work with research assistants for professors. Could a fine art, so a string of questions here. So campus time, I would say it's difficult to say, and it might vary. I would say that typically, for instance, my students who attend the foundations lectures, who have a minimum of 2 seminars a week, who might be coming to one of the medieval work in progress seminars every few weeks, I think that they probably come into campus maybe 4 out of 5 days. They might not be full days. Some of those days they might be just picking up books from the library. In the period when you're working on a dissertation, you might be working away from the Courtauld much more, might be working in the British Library or the Warburg or other libraries or at home. So I would say it's very difficult to generalize, but what I would say again is that you will be busy during the MA, particularly in the talk period. And then when you're working on your dissertation, you have 3 months that dissertation, but you'll find that time flies past. So there's a question about relationships with other institutions, or could a fine art component be included? I would say no, the fine art is not something that would typically be included. I have taught students before who have a fine art background, and often they can bring a very interesting perspective to materials, but you are assessed fundamentally on your written work, and that is what you need to submit as part of your application. And certainly it's you are assessed on your ability to engage with visual materials. Artists often have a very interesting perspective on that, but you cannot, a fine art component could not be utilized as part of your dissertation. Here's a question perhaps for you, Alex. If English is not my first language, but I've completed both a bachelor and master's degree in English, do I still need an English proficiency test?
So that starts to get into a more individual case. The English language requirements part of our website goes into a bit of detail about where in the world you can study in English that might provide exemption. It can get quite complicated, and there can be some quite strange differences. Generally speaking, it sounds like it could be, but either check that page of our website first, and then if it doesn't become clear, then email us at the PG admissions address, and we'll be happy to take a look and give you a finite answer on that.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to try putting my video back on, but if I freeze, then I'll turn it back off again. There's a question, will there be an interview? Not normally, we don't normally interview, but we might do it if, for instance, we couldn't quite get to grips with the application, or there was something missing from there, or there was a very close call between two closely matched students. So it's not impossible, but it's relatively unlikely that you'll be called for an interview. And if you are, that might be in person, or it might take place on Zoom. Do you consider deferred applications? No, we don't, because we never know what students are going to apply in any particular year. So you can only apply for the following year. Is it possible to submit 2 pieces of writing? Absolutely. For the writing sample, that's fine. Again, as I say, it's the kind of full portfolio of what you submit that really matters, but exactly what you choose and how you explain that is kind of up to you, whatever you think speaks best to your abilities. Do foreign languages play an important part in the selection progress of special options? And if so, at what level is expected? So I think in none of the special options is proficiency in a language other than English requirement. It is true that in some options, like the Italian Renaissance option, if you could show that you could speak and read in Italian, that would be an advantage. It's true for my option on Spain, but it's never an absolute requirement. Or your reading materials, you would have in English. Of course, there's always a much larger bibliography, and if you've got those language skills, then when it comes to your own research and dissertations, that opens up new opportunities for you. It's not, so it's impossible to say what role they play in the process. Again, it's part of a kind of a portfolio of your application. Does the MA course provide opportunities for work placement for galleries and museums? No, that's not part of the structure of the MA in History of Art. There are some MAs where you might work quite closely with museum collections, and certainly a lot of our MA students go on to take roles in museums and collections. But there's we do have an MA in curating, which has work placements, but the MA in History of Art doesn't. These questions keep coming. I'm going to see how we can go. How much time will students have for the final dissertation? Roughly speaking, it's about 3 months. And during that time, apart from a short break over Easter, the libraries and so on are all open, and as are other libraries in London and beyond. And during that period, you will also periodically meet with your special options teacher to guide you through that process. Can we start the application and keep going back and editing, or does everything need to be submitted at once? Alex?
Absolutely, yeah. And actually this year we introduced a slightly revamped application portal, so it should be more clear when you do go in and what needs to be completed. So it should be even more straightforward and kind of more obvious on that exact front. On that note, being a new application, if you experience any problems going through it, it's the first year we've implemented it, do get in touch straight away and we'll take a look and help you out there.
Okay, I think we are actually getting to the end of the questions. There's a question here: does the admissions committee prefer students who are a year or 2 out of their undergrad rather than those coming straight from their undergraduate degree? And I would say not necessarily. If you were, but it depends. As with all these things, if you were applying to a course on Spain and you'd spent a year in Spain, that might be an advantage. But there's no absolute. It's for you in a way to make the case in your application. And then I think the last question are footnotes, including in the writing sample word count. I mean, I wouldn't worry about it. Like, as I say, none of these things are absolute. Probably not. Normally, they're not included in Courtauld word count, but no one's going to disregard your writing sample because you slightly go over or whatever. Really, and it might be that your tutor just reads a kind of a sample of what you. I think what you want to do is provide the best work that you can. That's what I would say. And if that means it's shorter, then there's no harm in that. Alex, do you want to just mention the virtual admissions?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's been great. We've been had a very engaged question section, which is always good to see. It means there's lots of people interested and want to know more. So if you have any questions in the interim, the PG admissions email address that we've mentioned before is where to find us. We do have 2 kind of virtual drop-in sessions, which will basically be like this, but just myself or my colleague, probably me, just on hand to answer questions kind of in this kind of flowing way, which we find really useful. The next one, the first one will be on the 15th of December. And then the second one will be on the 5th of January, sort of in the approach to the application deadline there, between 2 and 3 on those days. So there'll be more information up on the website about those as well. But yeah, if you have any questions, especially at that point, you'll get started on your application and kind of things will pop up, I'm sure. So those are great sessions if you have any kind of questions that you have as you're working through.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope and look forward to seeing some of you in the new academic year.
Great. Thank you, everyone.